At my sister's wedding, my family locked our grandmother in a back room so she wouldn't embarrass the guests. She sat alone for 3 hours in her best dress, holding a gift envelope in her lap, waiting for someone to remember she existed. I found her. I took her arm, and I walked her past 200 guests, straight to the head table, while my mother's face turned the color of the tablecloths. But it's what happened when Grandma opened that envelope that ended my family's world as they knew it. Because the woman they hid in a storage room like an old coat was the reason every single person in that ballroom had anything at all. And the envelope wasn't a wedding gift. It was a reckoning, $12 million deep. Before I tell you exactly what was written on the papers inside that envelope, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button if you believe the people we hide away in back rooms are usually the ones who built the whole house. My name is Rachel Whitmore. I'm 29 years old. And this story isn't really about me. It's about the strongest woman I've ever known, and the family that decided she had become an inconvenience. Her name is Eleanor. She's 82. And before she was Grandma, before she was the woman my mother sighed about at dinner parties, she was something my family works very hard to forget. She was the founder. In 1971, as a young widow with 2 small children and $400, my grandmother started a commercial cleaning company out of the trunk of a borrowed car. She scrubbed office floors at night and did the books at dawn. By the time I was born, Whitmore Facility Services had 300 employees and contracts in 4 states. Everything my family has: the houses, the cars, the country club memberships, my sister's $200,000 wedding. Every dollar of it flows from the business one stubborn woman built on her knees with a bucket and a brush. My mother runs the company now. She took over as CEO 9 years ago, and somewhere along the way, she started telling the story differently. In her version, Grandma helped out in the early days. In her version, the company was really built by the professional management, meaning her. I've sat at galas and heard my mother accept awards for an empire she inherited, while the woman who actually built it sat at home. Because, as Mom put it, big events confuse her now. Here's the truth about my grandmother's condition, because it matters. 3 years ago, Eleanor was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Some days the fog rolls in and she calls me by my mother's name or asks about people who are long gone. But most days she is sharp, funny, and devastatingly observant. The doctors were clear: early stage, slow progression, and on her good days, fully lucid and legally competent. My family heard the diagnosis differently. They heard, "She's finished." From that day on, they stopped seeing a matriarch and started managing a liability. I was the only one who kept showing up. Every Sunday, without exception, for 3 years. Not out of duty, because Sunday afternoons with Eleanor were the best hours of my week. We'd drink her terrible strong coffee, and she'd tell me stories about the early days, about contracts won and betrayal survived. People show you who they are when they think you can't fight back anymore, she told me once, tapping her temple. I forget names now, sweetheart. But I never forget that. I didn't know it yet, but my grandmother had been watching my family very, very closely. And she had already made her move. To understand what happened at that wedding, you need to understand my family and the quiet war that had been building for 3 years. My mother, Diane, is the kind of woman who irons dish towels. Everything in her world exists to be seen. The house is staged for guests who might drop by. The Christmas card is art directed, and the family is a brand. My father, Gerald, learned decades ago that the path of least resistance runs directly behind my mother, and he has walked it faithfully ever since. And then there's my younger sister, Madison. 26, beautiful, and raised so completely inside my mother's mirror that I'm not sure she's ever had a thought Diane didn't approve first. Don't misunderstand me. I loved them. I still do, in the complicated way you love people who disappoint you on schedule, but somewhere in the last 3 years, I watched them do something I couldn't forgive. I watched them erase my grandmother in real time. It started with small things, the way it always does. Eleanor stopped being invited to restaurant dinners. The noise disorients her, Rachel. It's a kindness. Then family photos started happening on days she wasn't up for it, which was strange because I'd usually spent that exact afternoon with her, laughing until my ribs hurt. Then came Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when my mother served dinner at the big table and set a separate, quiet place for Grandma in the sunroom. So she can rest. She prefers it. I carried my plate into the sunroom and ate with her. Eleanor looked at me over her glasses and said, dry as sandpaper, apparently, dementia is contagious now. You'll be at the card table by Easter. That was the thing about my grandmother that my family never understood. They thought the fog meant she couldn't see. But between the fog, she saw everything, and she cataloged it with the precision of a woman who had spent 50 years reading contracts and reading people. The engagement changed everything from a slow erasure into an open campaign. When Madison's fiancé Trevor proposed at a rooftop restaurant with a photographer my mother had hired hiding behind a pillar, the wedding instantly became the Whitmore family's moon landing. 200 guests, a historic estate venue, a planner flown in from another city. My mother spoke about it the way generals speak about campaigns, and at the center of every conversation was one word, image, and a woman with dementia did not fit the image. I was at the house the night it was decided. They didn't know I could hear them from the kitchen, or maybe they'd simply stopped caring what I heard. My mother's voice, crisp and reasonable, the voice she uses for firing people. Obviously, she can't just circulate, Madison. Half the industry will be there. Investors, the Hendersons. What happens when she calls someone by the wrong name? When she tells one of her rambling stories, it takes one moment, one video on someone's phone, and that's the story of your wedding forever. Madison's voice smaller, testing. So we just don't invite Grandma? A pause. Then my mother, brightly, the sound of a problem being solved. No, she comes. Of course she comes. How would it look if she didn't? There's a lovely little parlor room off the east hallway. Quiet. Comfortable. We'll have someone bring her a plate. She'll be at the wedding. A beat. She just won't be in it. I stood in that kitchen holding a glass of water I never drank, and I understood that my family had found the perfect crime. They weren't excluding her. No one could ever accuse them of that. They were simply going to store her, like a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor, close enough to count as present and far enough away to stay invisible. I wanted to walk in there and burn the whole plan down that very night. I didn't, and I need to be honest with you about why. It's the same reason I didn't fight a dozen battles before it. Because 2 weeks earlier, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, over terrible strong coffee, my grandmother had grabbed my wrist, looked at me with eyes as clear as January air, and told me a secret that changed absolutely everything. It was a Sunday in early spring, 6 weeks before the wedding. I remember because the crocuses were up in her garden, and Eleanor had spent 10 minutes complaining that the squirrels had opinions about her bulbs. We were on our second cups of coffee when she suddenly set hers down, reached across the table, and closed her hand around my wrist. Her grip surprised me, strong, deliberate, and when I looked up, the woman looking back at me wasn't the frail figure my family managed like a scheduling problem. It was the founder. The widow with $400 and 2 babies who built an empire out of a bucket. "Rachel," she said, "it's a good day today. My head is clear. So I need you to listen, because I don't know how many of these days I have left, and I refuse to waste one. I put my cup down. I know what they think of me, she said calmly, without a drop of self-pity. Your mother believes I've already left. She talks about me in the past tense while I'm in the room. She thinks the company is hers. The houses are hers. The story is hers. A small, sharp smile. She's been rewriting history for 9 years. But, sweetheart, I wrote the original. Then she told me what she had done. 18 months earlier, long before anyone questioned her competence, back when the diagnosis was brand new, and her lucid stretches were long, Eleanor had quietly called Samuel Okafor, the attorney who had handled Whitmore Facility Services' legal work for 30 years, not the family's social lawyer, her lawyer, the one who still called her boss. Over 4 months of documented meetings, she had restructured everything she owned. Her controlling shares in the company, 52%, which my mother had somehow never confirmed weren't already hers. The house Eleanor lived in, the lake property, the investment accounts my family assumed were long depleted. All of it had been moved into a living trust, and the succession terms of that trust had been rewritten, witnessed, and sealed, and she had done it bulletproof. Because Eleanor Whitmore had spent 50 years watching people contest wills and shred families in court, and she knew exactly what her family would say the moment they learned. She wasn't in her right mind. So every single signing session had been scheduled on the same day as a full cognitive evaluation by her neurologist. 4 sessions. 4 independent letters of competency, each dated the same morning as the documents. And at Samuel's suggestion, every meeting had been recorded on video, Eleanor sharp and precise, explaining in her own words exactly what she was doing and exactly why. Sam says it's the cleanest estate file he's ever built, she said, with the pride of a craftsman. Let them contest it. I want to watch them try. I sat there with my heart pounding. Grandma, who did you leave it to? She patted my wrist and ignored the question entirely, which I would learn was itself an answer. The trust stays silent until I choose to reveal it or until I'm gone. Those are the terms. Nobody knows. Not your mother, not Sam's staff, nobody but Sam and me. Her eyes glittered. And now you know it exists. Because I need one thing from you, Rachel. One thing only. Anything. When the moment comes, and it will come, your mother is building towards something. I can feel it. I don't want you to fight them for me. No arguments, no scenes on my behalf. I've watched you bite your tongue at that table for 3 years, sweetheart, and I love you for it. But when the moment comes, I only need you to do one thing. She squeezed my wrist. Stand next to me. That's all. Don't speak for me. Don't defend me. Just make sure I'm not alone in the room when I speak for myself. That's it? I asked. That's everything, she said, and picked her coffee back up as if we'd been discussing the squirrels. The rest is already done. It's been done for over a year. They just don't know it yet. She took a sip, and over the rim of the cup, my 82-year-old grandmother winked at me. People show you who they are when they think you can't fight back. Well, I've been letting them show me. Every dinner I wasn't invited to, every photo I wasn't in, every decision made over my head. I've seen all of it, Rachel. And so has Sam. I drove home that evening with my hands tight on the wheel, understanding for the first time that the quiet old woman in the sunroom was not a passenger in this story. She was the author. My family thought they were managing her decline. They were actually writing exhibits for her file. So 6 weeks later, when I stood in that kitchen and heard my mother design a lovely little parlor room to store her mother-in-law in, I didn't burn the plan down. I gripped my glass of water, I breathed, and I remembered my one job. Stand next to her. Make sure she's not alone when the moment comes. I just didn't know the moment would come at the wedding itself, Or that my grandmother would walk into that back room carrying the trigger in her handbag, sealed inside a cream-colored envelope with my sister's name on it. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in perfect June light, and my family moved through it like a military operation with floral arrangements. The venue was everything my mother had dreamed of. A historic estate with stone terraces, a ballroom with chandeliers older than the state itself, and a staff trained to whisper. 200 guests, a string quartet. My sister, I'll admit, looked genuinely breathtaking, and somewhere off the east hallway, behind a door most guests would never notice, a lovely little parlor room had been prepared with an armchair, a small table, and a plate of finger sandwiches wrapped in plastic. I picked Grandma up myself that morning. My mother had arranged a car service for her, scheduled, I noticed, to arrive a full hour after the ceremony began. A detail? Always details with Diane. I simply showed up 2 hours early instead and rang Eleanor's doorbell. She opened the door, dressed and ready, and my breath caught. She wore a deep navy dress I'd never seen, pearl earrings, and her silver hair swept up the way it looked in the old photographs from the company's early days. She looked like a founder. She looked like a woman going to a board meeting she intended to win. In her hands was a small cream-colored envelope, Madison's name written across it in her careful, old-fashioned script. "You look incredible," I told her. "I know," she said and smiled. "Help me with my coat." In the car, she was quiet for a long while, watching the town slide past. Then, without turning from the window, she said, "They've put me in a side room, haven't they?" It wasn't a question. My hands tightened on the wheel. I hadn't told her. I'd spent 2 weeks agonizing over whether to tell her, and I'd failed to find the words. "Grandma." "Sweetheart, your mother confirmed my comfortable seating arrangements 3 separate times this week by phone. Diane never confirms anything 3 times unless she's hiding something inside it. I ran that company for 40 years. I invented her tricks." She finally turned and looked at me, and there was no hurt in her face. There was something far more dangerous. There was clarity. "It's all right, Rachel. In fact, it's perfect." "Perfect?" "Grandma, they're going to stick you in a storage room during Madison's wedding." "Yes," she said calmly, "in front of 200 witnesses on the most documented day in this family's history, with photographers in every corner. Your mother is going to demonstrate exactly who she is. Publicly, permanently." She smoothed the envelope in her lap the way a card player smooths a winning hand. "For 3 years, they've shown me who they are in private. Today, they'll do it in front of everyone. And then, sweetheart, then it will be my turn." I glanced at the envelope. "Grandma, what's in it?" She looked out the window again, and I watched a small smile settle into the corner of her mouth like it had lived there all along. "A wedding gift," she said, "the most honest one this family has ever received." We drove the rest of the way in silence. Eleanor watched the summer fields go by, serene as still water, and I gripped the wheel of that car knowing with absolute certainty that I wasn't driving my grandmother to my sister's wedding. I was driving her to the moment she'd been preparing for over a year. The estate was already humming when we arrived. Valets in white gloves, guests drifting across the lawn in silk and linen, a photographer's drone buzzing above the rose gardens like an expensive insect. We made it exactly 11 steps into the entrance hall before my mother materialized. She was flawless, of course, champagne-colored gown, hair like sculpture, and her face performed joy while her eyes did math. "Mom, you're early," she said to Eleanor, in that bright voice that always sounds 1 octave away from a fire alarm. "And don't you look lovely?" Then, without missing a beat, she raised a hand and a young wedding coordinator with a headset appeared at her elbow. "Chloe here is going to take you to your special seating area. It's quiet and comfortable. You'll have everything you need." How thoughtful. Eleanor said pleasantly. "We just don't want you getting overwhelmed with all the noise and the crowd." "Of course," my grandmother said, patting my mother's arm. "You've thought of everything, Diane. You always do." I watched my mother blink, thrown just for a second by how easily it had gone. She'd prepared for resistance. She got serenity, and serenity from Eleanor Whitmore should have terrified her. I started to follow, but my mother's hand closed on my elbow. "Rachel, you're at table 2. Family photos are at 4. Please don't disappear." A pause, and then, quieter, with the closest thing to honesty she'd offered me in years. "Please don't make today difficult." "I won't make it anything, Mom," I said. "Today is going to make itself." The parlor room was worse than I'd imagined. Oh, it was pretty. My mother would never be caught being cruel in an ugly room. But it was small, windowless except for one narrow pane, tucked past the coat check in the service corridor. An armchair, a carafe of water. A little speaker, piping in the ceremony audio like a broadcast from a country she wasn't allowed to enter. Chloe, the coordinator, settled Eleanor in with the pained smile of a young woman following orders she hated, and left. "I'll stay with you," I said. "You will not," Eleanor said crisply, arranging the envelope on her lap. "You'll go out there, you'll smile, you'll be seen. I need you in that room, sweetheart, not hiding in here with me. Watch, listen, and when it's time, you'll know when, you come and get me." She looked up at me, and her eyes were glittering again. "Go on. Let them have their perfect afternoon first. Every performance deserves an intermission before the final act." So I went. God help me, I went. I sat through the ceremony, which was, I'll admit, beautiful, and I watched my sister marry Trevor under an arch of white roses while a string quartet played and my mother dabbed her eyes with perfect timing for the photographer. I sat through cocktail hour. I smiled. I was seen. And the whole time, one image sat behind my eyes like a splinter, an 82-year-old woman in her best navy dress, alone in a windowless room, listening to her own family's laughter through a speaker. 3 hours. That's how long they left her there. 3 hours while the reception roared and the champagne towers came down and my mother gave a toast about family being everything. It was during the salad course that I finally broke, when I overheard a cousin ask my mother where Grandma Eleanor was, and my mother, without a flicker, said the sentence that ended my patience forever. "Oh, she wasn't up for it today. You know how she is now." I set down my fork, and I stood up. I didn't storm out of the ballroom. I want that on the record. I walked out the way my grandmother would have, unhurried, spine straight, smiling at the Hendersons as I passed their table. But my heart was hammering like a fist on a door, down the east hallway, past the coat check, past 2 catering staff who glanced at me and looked away. I opened the parlor door, and the sight that met me will stay behind my eyes for the rest of my life. Eleanor was sitting exactly where I'd left her, spine straight, ankles crossed, handbag on her lap, the envelope squared neatly on top of it. The finger sandwiches sat untouched, still in their plastic. Through the little speaker in the corner, tinny and distant, came the sound of 200 people laughing at the best man's speech. My grandmother was staring at the narrow window at a slice of garden she couldn't reach, and for one unguarded second before she heard me, she looked exactly like what my family had decided she was, a woman placed in storage. Then she turned, saw my face, and the founder came back into her eyes like a light switching on. "Well," she said quietly, "is it time?" "It's time," I said. "Mom just told the Hendersons table that you weren't up for it today." Eleanor absorbed that with a slow nod, the way she probably once absorbed news of a rival underbidding her on a contract. Then she held out her hand. "Help me up, sweetheart, and fix my hair in the back. If I'm going to end an era, I intend to look immaculate doing it." I will remember that walk for the rest of my life. Out of the parlor, down the east hallway, her hand resting on my arm, not leaning on me, resting like a queen using a railing she doesn't need. Past the coat check, through the tall double doors of the ballroom, into the golden light and the noise and the swirl of 200 guests, and then the noise began to die. It moved through the room like weather, table by table, conversation by conversation, heads turning, forks pausing halfway. Because everyone in that industry crowd knew exactly who she was. Half of them had shaken her hand at contract signings. Some of them owed their careers to her, and every single one of them had been told, in my mother's regretful little murmur, that poor Eleanor wasn't up for it today. Yet here she was, navy dress, pearl earrings, chin level, walking the full length of the ballroom on her granddaughter's arm, past the champagne towers, past the cake, past my mother, who had risen halfway out of her chair and simply stopped, frozen between standing and sitting, her face cycling through calculations that no longer had answers. Madison saw us next. My sister, radiant in white at the head table, went very still, her new husband's hand finding hers under the table. We didn't stop. We walked straight to the head table, and I pulled out the empty chair beside the bride, the chair that should have been Eleanor's from the beginning, and my grandmother sat down in it as if it had been reserved for her all along. Because it should have been. The ballroom was silent now, truly silent. Even the quartet had trailed off. Eleanor took her time. She settled her handbag. She smoothed her dress. Then she picked up the cream-colored envelope, looked down the length of the head table at my sister, and smiled the warmest smile I'd ever seen on her face. "Madison, darling," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of that room. "Happy wedding day. I brought your gift. And I think, since the whole family is finally in one room, I'd like you to open it now." For a moment, nobody moved. 200 guests sat frozen between courses, sensing, the way crowds always sense, that something was happening that wasn't on the program. My mother finally completed her journey out of her chair, gliding toward the head table, with a smile stretched over her face like plastic wrap. "Mom," she said, low and bright at once, "what a wonderful surprise. Why don't we do gifts later at the family brunch when it's more private?" "Oh, I think we've had enough privacy, Diane," Eleanor said, pleasantly, without looking at her. 3 hours of it, in fact. The sandwiches were lovely. A ripple went through the nearest tables. Someone's fork clinked down. My mother's smile held, but her eyes flicked to the photographer. And I understood, with something close to awe, that even now, she was calculating the optics. Madison looked from her grandmother to her mother, a bride caught between two storms. And then, "I'll give my sister this one moment, because it matters." She reached out and took the envelope. Maybe it was courage, maybe it was curiosity. Maybe some part of Madison, buried under 26 years of our mother's mirror, simply wanted to know. Her thumb broke the seal. Inside was not a check. Inside were 3 folded pages of heavy legal paper, and as Madison unfolded them, I watched her wedding day glow drain out by degrees. Her lips moved slightly, reading, then stopped. Then she looked up, not at Eleanor, at our mother. "Mom," she said in a small voice, "what is the Whitmore Family Trust?" The color left my mother's face so fast I actually saw it happen, like water pulled from a sink. "Read it out loud, darling," Eleanor said gently. "It's addressed to you, but truthfully, it concerns everyone." Madison's hands were trembling now. Notice of Trust Administration. Eleanor R. Whitmore, grantor, restructured and executed 18 months prior. She turned the page, scanning faster. Comprising 52% controlling interest in Whitmore Facility Services, the residents at Maple Crest. The lakeshore property, all investment holdings. Her voice thinned to a whisper. Mom, it says she still owns everything. It says the shares were never transferred to you. It says, Eleanor continued calmly, picking up where her granddaughter's voice failed, that the company your mother has been calling hers for 9 years has at every moment of those 9 years belonged to me. She ran it. I allowed that. There is a difference, and the difference is 52%. My mother made a sound, half laugh, half gasp, and grabbed the back of Madison's chair. Mom, this is absurd. You're confused. You haven't been well. Everyone knows you haven't been well. She turned to the room, voice rising, reaching for the story she'd spent 3 years installing. She has dementia. She doesn't know what she's signing anymore. This won't hold up for 5 minutes. Funny you should say that, Diane, said a new voice from the ballroom doors. Every head in the room turned. A silver-haired man in a charcoal suit stood at the entrance, briefcase in hand, unhurried as Sunday. Samuel Okafor, Grandma's lawyer of 30 years. Because I brought the medical evaluations, he said, walking calmly up the center of that silent ballroom, all 4 of them, and the videos. Samuel Okafor crossed that ballroom the way he'd probably crossed 100 courtrooms, without hurry, without doubt, letting the silence do half his work for him. Apologies for the interruption, he said to Madison with a small, courtly bow. And congratulations, my dear. I was instructed by my client to attend from 4 o'clock onward and to remain outside unless a specific sentence was spoken. He set his briefcase on the corner of the head table and glanced at my mother, almost kindly. The sentence was, she doesn't know what she's signing. Eleanor was quite sure someone would say it. She even predicted who. I looked at my grandmother. She was sipping a glass of champagne someone had poured her, watching her own play unfold with the calm of a director on opening night. When the moment comes, I only need you to stand next to me. She hadn't needed a defender. She'd needed a witness. The whole room was her witness now. Samuel opened the briefcase. For the record, and there are 200 people here, so let's call this a record. The Whitmore Family Trust was executed across 4 signing sessions, each conducted on the same morning as an independent cognitive evaluation by Dr. Reyes, board-certified neurologist. 4 letters of competency dated to the hour. He laid 4 cream folders on the tablecloth, one by one like a dealer laying out a winning hand. Each session was also recorded on video, at my client's insistence. I have them with me. Would anyone like to watch Eleanor Whitmore 18 months ago explain, lucidly, precisely, and I must say rather wittily, exactly what she owned and exactly what she intended? Nobody spoke. Somewhere near the cake table, a phone was unmistakably recording. I thought not, Samuel said mildly. My mother tried one more time. I almost admired it. This is a wedding, she hissed, voice cracking at the edges. Whatever this performance is, we will discuss it privately, as a family. Privately, Eleanor repeated. She set down her champagne, and when she spoke again, her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. 50 years of boardrooms lived in it. Privately is where you've kept me for 3 years, Diane. Privately is the sunroom on Thanksgiving. Privately is the photographs I wasn't in, the dinners I wasn't told about, the car service booked to arrive an hour late this morning. Privately is a windowless parlor room with sandwiches in plastic, while you told this room I wasn't up for it. She rose from her chair, slowly, and stood at her full height. You didn't want me seen, so you may now watch me be seen. You wanted me quiet, so listen. She turned to the room. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. In 1971, I started the company that paid for this wedding with $400 in a borrowed car. I have dementia. Some days are fog. But I signed my trust on the clear days with doctors watching because I knew that the same people who hid me in back rooms would one day call me incompetent to take what I built. Her eyes found my mother's and held them. You managed my company, Diane. You never owned it. And as of this morning, you no longer manage it either. Sam filed the paperwork at 9 a.m. The board was notified at noon. My mother's hand went to the back of the chair again. This time it missed. You're removing me? She whispered. No, darling, Eleanor said softly. You removed yourself. I just kept the receipts. The sound my mother made next wasn't a scream. Screams need air, and Diane Whitmore had none left. It was a small, cracked whisper, aimed at no one. You can't. She can, Samuel said gently. She did, this morning. And then the dam broke. My mother spun toward the guests, toward the Hendersons, the investors, the industry people whose opinions had been her compass for 20 years, and began to talk. Fast. Too fast. About stress, about her mother's condition, about elder manipulation, about how someone had clearly gotten into Eleanor's ear. And here her eyes found me, standing beside my grandmother's chair, and the last mask came off entirely. You. She pointed at me across her own daughter's wedding cake. You did this. Sunday visits. 3 years of Sunday visits. I should have known. You wormed your way in. You turned a sick old woman against her own family. Diane. Eleanor's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade through ribbon. One word. My mother stopped mid-sentence, the way employees had probably stopped for 50 years. Rachel, my grandmother said, did not know what was in that envelope until tonight. She never asked me for a single thing, not once, in 3 years of Sundays. Eleanor let that sit, then delivered the line I will hear for the rest of my life. She's the only person in this family who visited the woman, Diane. Everyone else was visiting the will. Somewhere in the crowd, someone exhaled audibly. The phone near the cake table was still recording. My mother stood in the wreckage of her perfect afternoon in front of 200 witnesses with nothing left to manage. It was Madison who moved first. My sister, still holding those 3 pages, mascara beginning its slow collapse, stood up in her wedding dress. And instead of going to our mother, she walked around the head table, knelt beside Eleanor's chair, and took her grandmother's hand. 3 hours? Madison whispered. You were in that room for 3 hours? On my wedding day? She turned to our mother, and her voice did something I'd never heard it do. It separated. You told me she'd be comfortable. You said it was what she wanted. You said she'd be confused by the reception. Madison stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth, and I watched 26 years of the mirror crack down the middle. I let you convince me. On my own wedding day, I let you hide my grandmother in a closet. Madison, sweetheart, you're emotional. This is not the time. It is exactly the time, Madison said. It was supposed to be my time. She looked down at Eleanor. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't ask. That's the worst part. I never even asked where you were. Eleanor reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her granddaughter's ear, tender as anything. You asked tonight, she said. That's when it counts, darling. When it costs something. Then my grandmother stood, took her champagne glass, and tapped it once with her ring. And the entire ballroom, already silent, somehow went quieter. A toast, Eleanor announced, since I missed the others. To my granddaughter Madison on her wedding day. May her marriage be built like a good company, on honest books. A pause. The smallest smile, and to family, which is not who shares your name, it's who shows up on Sundays. 200 glasses rose. What choice did they have? Only one person's glass stayed on the table, and as the room drank, my mother turned very quietly and walked out of her own daughter's wedding. The strange thing about earthquakes is how normal the next morning looks. The sun came up, the caterers sent their invoice, and the Whitmore family woke into a world with entirely new geography. The weeks that followed sorted everyone into exactly who they were. The board confirmed the transition within days. With Eleanor's 52% asserted and Samuel's paperwork immaculate, there was nothing to fight. My mother's attorneys took one look at 4 competency letters, 4 dated videos, and 30 years of Samuel Okafor's reputation, and advised her, in writing, not to contest. She tried anyway, briefly. It lasted 11 days and ended with her own lawyer withdrawing from the case. The story of the wedding had already moved through the industry like weather. Nobody wanted to stand next to it. My mother did not apologize. I want to be honest about that because these stories always end with apologies, and ours didn't. Diane retreated into the big house with my father, into a silence that Gerald finally, after 35 years, did not manage on her behalf. He came to see Eleanor alone one Tuesday without announcing it. I don't know everything that was said. I know he was there for 2 hours, and that when he left, my grandmother said only, "Your father cried. He's 20 years late, but tears don't expire. He visits on his own now. That's its own kind of ending." Madison canceled her honeymoon's first week and spent it somewhere no one expected. At Eleanor's kitchen table, drinking the terrible strong coffee, asking questions. Real ones. About 1971, about the borrowed car, about the grandmother she'd been handed a caricature of. Trevor came too, and it turns out my sister married better than any of us knew, because it was Trevor who said quietly, "In my family, we'd have been proud to have her at the head table," and Madison who answered, "In ours, from now on, we will be." And Eleanor? Eleanor went back to work. Not full-time. She was 82 and honest about her fog days. But she took a seat on the board she'd rebuilt, installed an interim CEO she'd been quietly evaluating for a year, a woman, she noted, who'd started on the cleaning crews, and began every board meeting the same way. Let's keep the books honest and the meetings short. As for the trust, the question everyone had been afraid to ask out loud, Eleanor answered it herself, one Sunday, over coffee. The succession was split. The company's future secured under professional stewardship, provisions for Madison, provisions even for my mother, because I'm settling accounts, Rachel, not taking revenge. There's a difference. And I've had 3 years to learn it. And the house, the lake property, and the founder's shares. She slid a folder across the kitchen table to me, the same way she'd once gripped my wrist. "For the girl who visited the woman," she said, "not the will." I cried. She let me for exactly 1 minute, then pointed at the coffee pot and told me it wasn't going to refill itself. That's who she is. That's who she always was. Behind the door my family kept trying to close. Because here's what I know now, and what I'll leave you with. The people we tuck into back rooms. The ones we lower our voices around. The ones we decide are finished. They see everything. They remember what matters long after they've forgotten what doesn't. And sometimes, while an entire family is busy managing their decline, they're quietly holding the pen that writes the ending. My grandmother sat alone for 3 hours at that wedding, holding an envelope. Turns out she was never the one locked out. She was the one holding the key. If someone in your family has ever been pushed into a back room, or if you've ever been the one they underestimated, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you believe the quiet ones always get the last word. And this Sunday, visit somebody. Take care of yourselves.